Mother locked in a dark room, her children are no longer human. They promised they would care for her. But when the doors shut and the lights went out, all she could hear was the sound of silence and the betrayal of her own blood. No one in the village had seen the old woman in nearly 6 months. At first, people assumed she'd been moved to a care home. Her youngest son, Dewey, had mentioned something vague about her needing medical supervision. But their house remained the same: the rusting gate, the drooping bougainvillea by the window, the haunting quiet. And the third-floor room, with its thick curtains drawn day and night, always left a cold feeling creeping down spines. Inside that room was Milan, a woman who once ran the household with soft authority and warm eyes, now sat curled on a frayed mattress, alone with her memories and the weight of years. The window was boarded. The air was stale. The lock on the outside of the door, never seen by guests, clinked once a day when food was slid in. No words, no touch, just a metal tray and footsteps walking away. The children she raised with trembling hands and sleepless nights had become strangers. Milan had given everything. 3 children hung, Mai and Dewey, each raised through poverty, sickness, and heartbreak. She buried her husband early, took on 2 jobs, and still found time to read them bedtime stories. Her hands had washed their clothes, cooked their meals, wiped their tears. She sacrificed her youth so theirs could bloom. But now, she was a burden. When Hung's wife complained about her old people smell, and Mai claimed the house felt too cramped, the solution came swiftly, silently. They cleared the guest room upstairs, locked it from the outside, told themselves it was temporary, told the world she was resting somewhere peaceful. In truth, Milan had not seen the sky in 186 days. The loneliness was worse than the hunger. There were days they forgot to feed her. Other days she couldn't bring herself to eat the cold rice, the tasteless broth. Her eyes ached from the dark. Her fingers, once nimble and graceful, now trembled without purpose. But worst of all were the memories. The warm laughter around the dinner table. The birthdays. The promises. Her heart asked the same question every morning. What had she done to deserve this? Downstairs, life moved on. Hung worked at a bank. He spoke smoothly, wore tailored suits, and smiled at clients. His wife posted pictures of their perfect family on social media, carefully cropped to exclude the locked room above. Mai was a school principal. She spoke of moral values, gave speeches about compassion. At home, she never once knocked on her mother's door. She said it was best for everyone's mental health. And Dewey, the youngest, once the closest to Milan, was a corporate lawyer. He cried the first night she was locked in. Then he stopped visiting entirely. But something had shifted. It began with a whisper in the hallway, a soft, scratchy voice calling a name. Then, the youngest granddaughter, Bien, found a slip of paper tucked into her coloring book, written in shaky handwriting. "Is it still morning?" She brought it to her mother, who laughed nervously and threw it away. But and heard the whisper again that night, outside her room, so soft it felt like a breeze. And Conco du Kong? Milan was not mad, not delusional. She remembered everything. How Mai stopped calling. How Hung sighed when she forgot the stove was on. How Dewey flinched when she asked about his failed marriage. She remembered the day they walked her into the room, told her to rest, locked the door. She remembered each of their faces, trying not to look at hers. But her mind remained sharp. And though her voice had become hoarse, her will had not. So she waited. One day, when Hung was out late and Mai was hosting guests, the door creaked open. It was a small, wide-eyed girl with a flashlight and a heart bigger than any of the adults downstairs. She stepped in, saw the frail figure, dropped her toy, Baoi, and for the first time in 6 months, Milan felt something warm, a child's hand in hers. They began to meet in secret, and brought biscuits, water, drew pictures of trees and blue skies. Milan told her stories, taught her old songs, and slowly, the color returned to the old woman's cheeks. But secrets don't stay hidden. Mai found a drawing of Balan in the room with the stars. She screamed, beat her daughter, said the room was off limits, said, don't talk to her again, she's not the same anymore, and cried herself to sleep. But she never stopped believing what she saw. Her grandmother was still human. A storm hit one Thursday night. Thunder shook the windows. Power flickered. The lock malfunctioned. Milan stood by the door, listening. Somewhere deep inside her, something broke free. She grabbed her cane, pushed the door. It opened. She stood at the top of the stairs, trembling, soaked in shadows. The family dinner table was full. Laughter, wine. Dewey had come back. But when they saw her silhouette thin, ghost-like, the laughter died. She took one step, then another. They froze. No one moved. No one dared speak. She didn't shout, didn't accuse. She only said, "I'm still your mother." Mother locked in a dark room, her children are no longer human. Act 2. The walls that whisper. No one moved. Time cracked in the silence like dry branches under pressure. Her frail figure at the edge of the stairs looked like a memory summoned from guilt. Hung's wine glass trembled in his hand. Mai's eyes darted toward the hallway, calculating. Dewey's lips parted, but no words came out. Milan stood tall, taller than they remembered, not in height, but in presence, like something eternal had been pulled from the shadows. Her voice, dry as old paper, cut through the quiet. "Don't be afraid. It's just me." But they were afraid. Not of her, of what her presence meant. It meant they had failed. That night, the house didn't sleep. Mai locked her room. Hung paced the living room, muttering to himself. Dewey disappeared. Only and slept peacefully, tucked in with the feeling that something good had finally returned. Milan didn't go back to her room. She sat in the kitchen, warming her hands by the stove. Her back curled with time, but her eyes were clear. She didn't demand explanations. She didn't raise her voice. She simply asked, "Is there tea?" And in that moment, Hung realized something horrifying. She had forgiven them, and that made it worse. Days passed. The family tried to normalize her presence. They brought her downstairs, sat her in the sun for short periods. Dewey hired a caretaker. Hung suggested therapy. Mai tried prayer. But none of them said the truth. None of them apologized. And every time Milan smiled with those hollow, ancient eyes, the weight on their chests grew heavier. At night, the walls whispered. Hung began to hear tapping sounds outside his room. When he opened the door, nothing was there. One morning, he found a photo of him as a child sitting in Milan's lap, placed neatly on his pillow. He hadn't seen that photo in 20 years. He buried it in a drawer. Mai's nightmares returned. In them, she stood in front of a classroom, trying to teach, but her mouth wouldn't open. The children stared at her with black, hollow eyes. Behind them, Milan stood at the door, holding a wooden spoon, softly humming the lullaby she used to sing every night. Mai began drinking. Quietly. After school, she stopped visiting the kitchen. Dewey tried to escape it all. He offered to move Milan into a private home, a good one, near the beach. But when he brought it up, she looked at him and said gently, "Why do you always leave, Khan?" He couldn't look her in the eyes. That night, he dreamt of the night they locked her in the room. How she called his name until her voice cracked. How he stood outside the door, hands in his pockets, while Hung turned the key, and was the only one untouched. She sat with Milan every evening. They played cards, sang old songs, painted together, and began asking questions. Why do adults lie, Ba? Milan would smile. Because they are afraid of who they've become. Then, something happened. A journalist arrived at the school where Mai worked. He asked questions about her family, about the mysterious old woman people had started seeing again, about rumors of elder abuse. Mai denied everything, but the seed was planted. The next day, someone from social services knocked on their door. They panicked. Dewey prepared legal documents. Hung called in favors. Mai threatened to sue the journalist. But it was too late. The neighbors were whispering. The online post had gone viral. The locked mother. They begged Milan to stay silent. She said she would, but on one condition. Sit, all three of you, and listen. They sat. She opened an old box, pulled out photographs, letters, tiny drawings they had given her. One by one, she told stories. How Hung used to cry if she didn't kiss him goodnight. How Mai once skipped school just to take care of her when she was sick. How Dewey sat beside her all night after she lost her job. Her voice trembled only once. "I don't know when I stopped being your mother and started being your inconvenience." No one spoke. Tears streamed down Mai's face. Dewey stared at his hands like he no longer recognized them. Hung stood up and left the room. That night, Milan wrote something in her notebook. A will. She left the house within a week. Not by force, by choice. With a small suitcase and a faded umbrella, she took Anne's hand, kissed her forehead, and said, "You are the only one who still listens." She moved into a small, quiet cottage near the temple. She tended to a garden. She made tea for the monks. She wrote in her journal every evening. She did not look back. The children were left in the house. But it was no longer a home. Without her, the air felt colder. The food tasted bland. Their jobs became more meaningless. The money, the cars, the reputations, all hollow. People pointed when they passed. Whispers followed them into grocery stores and courtrooms. But worse than the shame was the silence. The absence. Hung sold the house and moved abroad. Mai quit her job. Dewey tried therapy but relapsed into drinking. They never spoke about that room again. But each of them kept a copy of that one photo, the one where they were young, and she held them like the world had never broken yet. And every year, on her birthday, and would visit the cottage. She brought flowers, drew pictures, and listened to the stories her parents had forgotten. She asked once, "Do you miss them?" Milan smiled. "I remember them." And that was enough. Mother locked in a dark room, her children are no longer human. Act 3. The dead of blood and memory. They thought time would make it fade. Months passed. News cycles moved on. The internet forgot. But shame doesn't obey calendars. It haunts. It carves its name into skin when no one's looking. Hung was the first to unravel. He took the promotion, moved to Canada with his wife and sons. A new city, new house, white snow, clean streets, and neighbors who didn't know the truth. But truth follows. It seeped into his children's eyes when they asked, "Where's Grandma?" It echoed in the question he couldn't answer. One evening, alone in his office, Hung poured himself whiskey and opened an email from a stranger. Attached was a recording. A child's voice, small but clear. They locked her in the dark and called it love. It was in years earlier, her tiny voice answering a social worker. He watched the video again, and again, and again, then smashed the laptop. That night, he sat in the bathtub, clothes still on, as cold water ran over him, and cried. Mai fared worse. She kept her job until the board suggested she take a leave. The rumors had returned. Parents were concerned. Sponsors dropped out. At home, her husband, who had stood by her out of habit more than love, left quietly, taking their teenage son. "You buried your mother," he said, packing. "No, I didn't," she snapped. "Exactly. That would have been more merciful." Left alone, Mai stopped opening the curtains. Food rotted in the fridge. The mirror became unbearable. She started hearing footsteps upstairs, slow, dragging, like slippers on old wood. But the room was empty, wasn't it? Dewey tried to drown it all in sound. Headphones, podcasts, loud clubs, fast cars, anything that kept the silence away. But it always returned when he was most vulnerable. In the back of a cab at 3 a.m. In the waiting room before a court hearing. In the dead quiet of a luxury apartment built for entertaining but empty of any love. He began visiting temples. Incognito. Face masked, eyes downcast. He'd sit, silent, behind the elderly who prayed, many of them forgotten by their own children. One afternoon, a monk sat beside him. "Young man," he said softly, "you don't look for peace. You run from guilt." Dewey broke. He wept like a child. Not because of shame. Because he finally missed her. Meanwhile, Milan lived simply. She cooked for herself, planted vegetables, took care of stray cats. She never mentioned her children by name, not even Tuan. But her health began to fade. Her heart, once strong, weakened. She prepared everything in silence. Wrote her letters, labeled old boxes, gave away her winter blankets. She asked the head monk to contact her lawyer when the time came. Then she waited. One morning, and found her still on the bench near the river, hands folded, eyes gently closed. She had passed peacefully, with the sky open above her, the sun warm on her face. Not in darkness, not alone, but free. Her funeral was small. The monks sang softly, and stood by the altar, holding the urn. No expensive flowers, no camera crews, just wind, incense, and truth. And 3 silhouettes in the distance. Hung, Mai, Dewey. They had arrived separately, too ashamed to speak, too late to change anything. They watched from behind the trees. Not welcome, not forbidden. After the crowd left, they stepped forward. 3 adult children. Older, grayer, broken. They knelt. None of them dared touch the urn. They simply bowed, heads to earth, silent, until Mai whispered, "Con Xian Loi me," and her voice cracked open something deep. Hung joined her. Then Dewey. Together, they wept into the soil. But the wind carried no reply. Back in the city, her will was read. Simple instructions. Modest savings divided. Her cottage gifted to the temple. A final note written in her own hand for her children. I gave you life, love, and silence. I leave you now with memory, pain, and time. Do with them what you never did with me. Listen. And so they paid. Not with jail, not with scandal, but with something worse. A hole that could never be filled. A love that could never be reclaimed. A mother they would never see again. They had locked her in the dark. But in the end, they were the ones who would never see light again.